Welcome to the CAFMA Connect. As you can see, Chief Freitag is not here today. He's taken a break from the controversial podcast that he has been producing for the last couple of weeks, and he has allowed us to come in and interview a special guest and friend of mine, Colin Field. So we're going to bring it down a notch from the last couple of weeks and have a good conversation about your experiences in the Mighty Oaks. So welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you bet. Well, kind of the reason, obviously we have you in today. You're here going to speak for our folks tomorrow at an awesome event. We've kind of titled it Resiliency, a resiliency event to kind of encourage folks to, live their best life. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate, you coming in. Obviously, you bring a lot of experience, not just from, recently in the Mighty Oaks, but obviously long before that. So you served in the Navy. So let's start there.
All right. Yeah. My career started out enlisted in the Navy when I was 17. I served for 14 years, all of which were in the SEAL teams. I spent most of my career SEAL Team 3. I also worked as a private security contractor for a little while overseas. And then again, I worked as a paramedic in the state of Idaho. Worked for the county, worked for Life Flight for about 5 years, and now pretty much most of my efforts are devoted towards working with Mighty Oaks. Yeah.
So now obviously met, in the process of the team leader. So you've been a team, how long have you been a team leader with the Mighty Oaks?
About 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're kind of making the next step, which I think the last phase, I was in phase 2, and you were doing the team leader trainer, which
right.
What is the role of the team leader trainer?
So in essence, train the trainer. So as we get new team leaders coming in, going through the training, then it would be my job to prep those guys up and teach them hopefully what they need to know to be successful at being a team leader.
So keeping eyes on guys like me. Perfect. No, that's good. And you kind of mentioned, getting into the Navy early on. Obviously, you kind of breezed right over, being a Navy SEAL. Obviously, folks outside looking in takes a little bit to accomplish that. So how you said you did it pretty quickly. How did that experience go?
Pretty good. Yeah. So I went straight through the pipeline. It's a little bit different now, but back when I went through, it was boot camp, and then I went off to my A school, which was Corpsman A school, and then I got orders to go to BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training in Coronado. After graduating BUDS, it was off to jump school for me, and then to SQT, which is SEAL qualification training. And then as a medic, once I graduated SEAL qualification training, I went to Fort Bragg and did the Army SOCM course, Special Operations Combat Medic course, and then finally landed at SEAL Team 3.
Nice. And explain, I guess, I've never understood the different teams, what the different roles are for the different teams.
Sure.
SEAL Team 3, what are some of the different roles those teams play, I guess?
So they used to, back once upon a time, then each team used to be designated a specific AO, area of operation. And I think it was right around the year 2001, they started implementing Force 21. So essentially what it used to be is one team would deploy 2 platoons at a time. And so it would just be this constant revolving process of these platoons from SEAL team deploying to their set AO that they would train for. And so now with the Force 21, it's not that recent, I guess about 20 years old now, but about 20 years ago, then it's changed where the team will deploy the entire team at one time, and they'll cover down on pretty much anywhere in the world that needs to be. So the coasts kind of depend on whether you're East or West Coast SEAL will depend on certain areas you deploy to. They still kind of maintain that a little bit, but pretty much they're interchangeable now, where one SEAL team is pretty much, whereas they used to have their own identities before, they're pretty interchangeable now.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. Okay, nice. And then as far as, what was the year you got in, you said?
I got in 2000.
2000, yeah. Mm-hmm. Obviously you had 2000, 9/11. What changed after that?
Quite a bit. So I was actually in BUDS when 9/11 happened. Okay. And I can remember the day that it happened, and We obviously weren't watching TV or anything like that. I wasn't able to see it unfold. I do remember one of the guys coming out, we were having our morning muster, and said, somebody bombed the World Trade Center. And I didn't think anything big of it. I said, what,
Sure.
again? Okay.
Yeah.
Didn't expect much to change with that. A lot did change starting immediately. They shut the base down, of course, and everything. One thing I do remember is the days after 9/11 was probably the worst I ever got beat in buds, because the instructors all wanted to leave. They all wanted to go back to the team to deploy.
Yeah.
And of course, they couldn't allow that. We still had to have instructors. So they were pretty ticked off, realizing that we were going to be deploying before them. So they let us know that. So they hammered us pretty good. But yeah, of course, it changed from peacetime to wartime immediately, where, the teams being what they are, we would still experience some combat even in peacetime, but nothing like what was coming up, where really the last time that the teams had seen anything like that was Vietnam. Yeah. And so it was, prior to that, everyone looking to that Vietnam era of Frogman, of what they did in Vietnam, and just almost idolizing that and looking up to those guys for that. And so now we were kind of picking up the mantle and carrying it forth from there. And so we were having some, every deployment was tough and in the thick of it for a long period of time. Yeah.
So how many, obviously you go through, deal with the 9/11, you get through buds. What was, how many deployments, did you do? 14 years, I think you said. What did that look like over that 14 years?
Yeah, altogether I made 9 deployments.
Okay.
So my deployments were 2 to the Pacific Theater, Southeast Asia. I did 1 to Iraq and 6 to Afghanistan over the years. And so, stopped deploying in 2014. Yeah, was the last one.
Last one, yeah. And then I think you mentioned it, you then spent some time as a contractor, following that. How much time did you spend, after you started doing that contract work? What did that look like?
So contractor work was interesting. Still back in the fight, so to speak. We're just a lot different capacity. Whereas before, almost trying to pick a fight on deployments every time we go out the door. Yep. Now quite the opposite. I don't want to fight because I don't have the entire weight of the U.S. Military behind me. Yeah. So it was definitely a different approach to things. I did enjoy it. It kept me working with similar guys that I was working with before. Sure. It was familiar work. It was real easy to transition into. Obviously, the money is quite good doing stuff like that.
I think there's a name for that. Contractor?
Contractor rich,
yeah, nice.
Yep. Yeah, I got to experience that for a little bit. Wasn't too smart with my money back then. You just think it's just going to keep coming that way. It doesn't. It eventually stops. But, I enjoyed doing that while I did it. But eventually hit a point in my career where I realized that I just wasn't able to continue doing the job that I wanted to do anymore. Mentally, I was not prepared to continue to keep deploying. That I had to take myself out of the game.
Yeah, no, I think that's similar story. I think it has come from a few different folks that we've seen. And obviously, it takes a level of intensity. You have to maintain that level of intensity for a long time. Yeah, and obviously that is a challenge as you continue on. I'm not going to make you tell too many stories, but there is one story I think you need to highlight because you shared it. I think when I was in Ohio, but. There was, you'll have to do it better, but where those 2 tanks kind of prevented the group coming in. So I just like that because it sounded to me more like something that would happen in like a Call of Duty or something like that. But you got to give me that. You got to give a little bit of that.
Yeah. Story. So we were operating in Iraq, and it was in Marine Corps battle space. So whenever you deploy to a war zone, the battle space is owned by either Marine Corps or Army. We never owned our own battle space. We're just too small for that. So we were operating within a Marine Corps battle space, and we were developing our own intelligence and operating on it. But we started doing this information sharing with the Marine Corps where they would give us intelligence, we'd give them some of our intelligence, and it was kind of this joint sharing of information to help everyone out. We had just recently started sharing our information with these guys, and we had intel that there was going to be a large attack on an Iraqi army forward operating base. So there had been precedent to this. I think it was about 2 or 3 months prior to this happening. There was a large attack on a Iraqi army base, and they almost overran it. It was very close. There was a few Americans that died in that attack, and a lot of Iraqi army that did. And so we had the intel that they were going to be basically repeating that on a different base. And so we decided that we were going to kind of cut them off at the pass, that we were going to sneak into this Iraqi army base in the middle of the night. And so when they think they're attacking a bunch of Iraqis, there'd be a SEAL platoon armed to the teeth, ready to go ahead and take them down. So we were armed and ready. Absolutely. I mean, it was going to be a pretty cakewalk for us, to be honest. But we were ready for them. And just prior to it, then we actually had a bird overhead that let us know that there was a large gathering of men at the local mosque that was just down the road from us, and saying basically, yes, this is on. This is about to happen. So we're getting kind of ready for this to happen. And as I said, we were sharing intelligence with the Marines, so they decided the best course of action was, since it turned out so poorly last time, was we were going to stop it. So they ended up parking 2 Abram tanks in front of the fob. And when those guys saw that, they're like, no, I don't want any part of that. So they turned around and walked the other way. And we were kind of bummed out about it. Like, oh, man, this is our opportunity. We had a great ambush set for them, but it didn't end up working out for us.
Well, I think it's funny because you said it. Obviously, here the base was going to be attacked, and you guys were looking for that fight.
Yep, that's
you
right.
were putting yourself there for that fight.
Yep.
And unfortunately, in your mind, fight didn't come.
Didn't work.
Obviously, there was plenty of other fights, I'm sure. But, I just remember hearing that, and all the stuff that you guys had brought in there was pretty impressive. But so let's, obviously fast forward a little bit. I mean, you had those experiences. You're dealing with all that stuff. You do the contractor work. You come back. A big part of your story is the Mighty Oaks. What got you to the Mighty Oaks?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I had a friend of mine that I had served with at Team 3. We did a number of deployments together. Probably my best friend from the teams that he had went through Mighty Oaks. And when he finished it up, then he gave me a call and said, hey, I think this is something that you need to do. Yeah. You need to go out there and go to this. And I remember thinking, like, man, there is no way I'm ever going to some Christian retreat, going to sit around the campfire and sing Kumbaya. That's not me, man. Never. Yeah. I told him, sure, I'll look into it with no intention. No intention whatsoever of ever doing so. Fast forward about a year from that, and my life was really spiraling out of control. Things were going sideways quick. I had gotten involved heavily into alcohol, had some run-ins with law enforcement, and my wife was at her wit's end with me. She didn't know what to do, and she was done, to be honest, and rightfully so.
Sure.
So I remember I was trying to grasp at straws to keep her to stay around. And at this point in my life, I was still not willing to admit that there was any problem. Yeah. I never thought that there was at that point. And so I remember pulling that out of the Rolodex, as I'm talking to my wife, like, hey, I can throw this Hail Mary pass. Like, I'm going to try and do something good, churchy, whatever. It's going to make it look like I'm at least trying. Maybe that'll keep her around for a little bit longer. So I tell her about that, and she says, yeah, go ahead, do whatever you want. She's not, she's not really expecting much of it either. And so when I went, I was not expecting any kind of change to take place when I went there. But little did I know there was a lot at work when I got there. I'll go into a little bit more on that tomorrow when I get to talk. Yeah. But perfect. There was a lot at work that once I got there that just amazing things started happening.
No, that's awesome. And I think, one of the things you mentioned as we were actually, driving here was, the Mighty Oaks started for veterans, obviously trying to reduce, veteran suicide. Yep. and looking at, obviously the treatment for veterans. And we've seen it at the first responder. We have a big veteran community in this area.
Right.
Medications, if you have whatever ailment you have these medications. I remember going from the first time I started, which I started in my career in 2002, and so you're already starting to see some of the folks returning at that point and some of the ramifications of war among those veterans. And I remember I learned really quick, you don't ask a veteran like what medication they're on, you ask for their box.
Yeah.
And they would come with a box of medications, and you sit there and go over them with them like, okay, why are you on this one? Like, I have no idea.
Right.
Why this one? No idea. And that was the treatment.
Right.
So obviously the Mighty Oaks was kind of a different approach. It obviously, like you mentioned, it's a faith-based approach to that spiritual component, to that that strength and that pillar. But that was the goal. They've expanded that now to include law enforcement, first responders, and we've seen, our area has seen, our own trauma, even just recently with suicides in both the local police department, local fire department. We see that same challenge, and we're not unique. That's happening all across the country.
Absolutely.
And obviously, the Mighty Oaks has expanded that role and to include those first responders. Now, I guess kind of share a little bit of what, being a team leader in the Mighty Oaks last several years, what you've seen on the first responder side and some of the apprehension, I guess, was what we were kind of discussing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've noticed, I've tried to talk guys into going that are first responders. I, worked as one for 5 years as a paramedic. And so I got a lot of friends that are in that arena, and I can recognize when some guys, could benefit from something like that. And they look at it as, I think that we've done a lot of work towards kind of dismantling that stigma of PTSD within the veteran community. They've done a lot of good work there, but that has not taken place among the first responders. And for whatever reason, they think that, well, I haven't been in some foreign combat zone. Yeah. I don't warrant this, or I shouldn't have this. And that's just couldn't be further from the truth. And even when guys show up that are first responders, they still are battling with those issues when they show up that I shouldn't be here. I'm taking someone else's seat. I don't deserve to have these feelings that I'm having, which is, it's completely false. Yeah. And I always talk to those guys at the end of the week, and they agree, like, oh, I actually do deserve to be here. And, I should be. And I'm glad that I've not met a single person yet that's like, man, that was a waste of my time. Not one. Yeah. Every single one of them have benefited in some way from a week out there at Mighty Oaks, and most of them have had huge, impactful, life-changing weeks out there, it's just amazing to see. And so, if I could talk to the veteran or the first responder community, it's that, man, it's trauma is trauma. Yeah. It doesn't matter where it occurs at. Trauma is trauma. And if you're a first responder, it's not a matter if you have been exposed, it's when. Yeah. You will be exposed to it. Yeah. And so we need to start breaking down those stigmas like what we did with the veteran community. Yeah.
No, that's awesome, because I think even from my own exposure, obviously a couple weeks ago, I had the opportunity to do phase 2, which is just a little bit more in terms of having to teach, but still a lot of observing, a lot of watching, which is kind of an awesome opportunity to watch folks go through the process. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is the apprehension, like, well, here I have this Navy SEAL done, 9 deployments, 14 years. Like my experience doesn't compare to that. Like you said, the trauma still brings us down. We both end up in a similar spot for different reasons. Right. And it is interesting to watch. Like this last time, I know several times guys talked about, the masks, and you walk in with that mask. And I remember even Kevin, who's obviously the leader of that of the week, he had said, it takes a little while for that mask to come down, especially for folks that are currently employed. Right. And what is interesting, when that mask come down, though, because I can think of a couple individuals, and one individual specifically, we were talking about him earlier, but I liked his testimony at the end, where at the end he stood up there and he said, I plan to tell you how cool I was. I plan to try to tell you this experience, that I had, that brought me to here, but it's like I realized like my life is a wreck, and I need to fix these aspects of it, and that's what the program offered to him. And it was interesting, that mask come down, where it's like you walk in, with an idea like, well, I want to try to compare. I want to try to like
Right.
show you like what I've done has got me to this point. It's legitimate.
Mm-hmm.
It's all legitimate at that point.
Yeah, right.
Whatever has gotten you to that
Exactly.
point, or even if you're not even in a position where you feel like, well, I'm in crisis. I didn't go there when what I felt was a crisis. I walked out of there stronger, though.
Right.
And I adjusted my trajectory,
Yeah.
a degree, if nothing
Yep.
else. And
Yeah.
that trajectory 10 years down the road is going to
Exactly.
be far different than it was today, or would have been if had I not made that adjustment.
Right.
So like you say, I think anybody can benefit from it.
Absolutely.
And the program has certainly, I think, provided a lot of opportunity in the first responder group in the same way it's done for the veteran community.
Yeah, absolutely.
What else? I guess as a team leader, you've been there a couple of years now. You did quite a few sessions this year. How many sessions?
I think 10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one, obviously, 10 weeks out of
Yeah.
the year you were spent
Right.
there working with. Obviously it's a men's program. There are men's and women's programs,
Right.
but obviously helping with the men's program. And what have you kind of seen, as a, maybe a common thread or just, a common challenge? You kind of mentioned the first responder aspect of it, maybe that feeling like I don't deserve to be here. What else?
Well, I would say that, kind of going along those same lines what we were just talking about is thinking that maybe folks don't measure up because of the number of guys that I've seen attend these programs, I could probably count the number of times on one hand that the only thing that a guy was suffering from was what he dealt with in combat.
Yeah.
I would say that the vast majority is outside of that.
Yeah.
And yes, there are issues that are compiled,
Sure.
they pile up and stuff like that, but the vast majority that's not the case.
Yeah.
It's normal trauma throughout life. It's people dealing with difficult childhoods,
Yeah.
difficult marriages. And so, it's been focused mostly on combat trauma with veterans, yes. But there is so much more that we deal with. That there's so many guys that come through and trauma isn't even their main issue.
Yeah.
It could be anything. We all have different things that we struggle with through life. And like you said, some guys are just there for a quick tune-up. And, I've had guys that were, like a full-blown pastor coming in, being on my team, and I'm like, man, what am I going to be able to teach this guy? Like, he's obviously more versed in this than I am.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just takes that outside one looking in to check your blind spots that you're not able to see.
I like
and they can identify some areas. Even the guys that are pastor can identify areas that they need to improve on and work on. And so
that's cool.
It's been just a wide array of things that pop up while you're there. And it's just, the cool thing is just being able to witness and be a part of that. I think when I got into EMS, the reason why I got into EMS was to help people.
Yeah.
I really wanted to help people. And I think that anyone who's worked in police, fire, any kind of first responder job, we know those calls are very few and far between where you feel like you actually made a difference.
Yeah, did good, yeah.
And I was actually just talking to my buddy this morning who's in EMS, and I was like, every time I go to Mighty Oaks, I feel like I just got that call.
Yeah.
And so that's a huge difference.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of folks being influenced. We've had several people from our own department that have had to attend, and I think, like you say, I don't think anybody feels that they walk away that it hasn't been impactful for them, regardless of what they take from it. That impact is there, and I think again, it's the value of it. I think it's the value of coming along some side of somebody else that has shared in a similar challenge, because you never know who that person is. Sometimes you see it's the groups within the attendees that create a bond, create a relationship, and are helping. But I think it's like anything else. The shirt says it. No one fights alone, or never fight alone. And I think that's the goal is never fight alone, and understand that you are not alone in your battle, in your struggle, whatever it is, whatever's gotten you into that point. You're not alone. So
yeah, I used to battle with that same thought process of nobody knows what I've been through.
Yeah.
Nobody can relate to what I've been through. I'd hold up in isolation, deal with it on my own. Nobody would warrant hearing my story. And I honestly believed it. If you weren't on this deployment, or if you didn't do as many deployments, or you haven't been here, done that. And I would hold up and I would believe that lie for a long time. And the first time that I kind of had that myth shattered in front of me was when I showed up to Mighty Oaks as a student.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to these instructors get up and share their story. And literally my words are falling out of their mouth. And I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? How is this possible?
Yeah.
But our problems are common to everyone.
Yeah.
And that's just a lie that we believe to keep ourselves held up in isolation, and something that if we start actually talking it out with our brothers, you're going to find out there's a lot more in common than you thought.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the huge value of it, is that common bond. Well, cool. I think we'll wrap it up. I appreciate your willingness to sit here. Normally, I am the victim of this this show, so thank you. You get to be a willing victim. I told you right at last minute, like, hey, Colin, here's what we're going to go do, and you're here doing it great, doing better than I do on that side. So I appreciate it.
No problem.
With that, obviously tomorrow, this won't be shown, so we'll already have done the program. But obviously you've come here. You're going to provide we're doing 2 sessions, morning and afternoon. Obviously sharing your story, sharing the experience. This is just kind of a little snippet of kind of what obviously you're going to be sharing tomorrow, much more in depth, which will be awesome. And again, we appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, thank you for having me.
You bet. With that, we're going to close it out. Freitag will be back next week. Then I'm sure there's going to be, some wonderful things to talk about, whether it's AMR, ambulances, or any of that stuff. So tune in next week for the rest of that. Until then, keep doing the work.